Hey, this is Jamie from Canadian Grit. We have Colin Clark, retired captain of a commercial airline. And tonight we're just getting together. We're old friends, and I've invited Colin on, who's doing a great service to me and Canadian Grit by being here to discuss the pilot's life at 35,000 feet, above or below, adventure, discipline, drama, humanity, and humor. And I chose these words because, knowing Colin, these are the words that I would associate when I think of him, and willing to be coming on here and sharing his adventures and stories with the rest of us. So thanks, Colin.
That's a very kind introduction, Jamie. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thanks for
My
being
pleasure to be
here.
here.
Yeah, yeah.
My pleasure.
What's start maybe by telling us what's the bird on your hat?
Well,
The
that's
airplanes
a
that
hat I picked. That's a hat I picked up in Vancouver at the float plane base there. They were introducing an electric airplane on their airplanes. They're going to run short distances, I guess. And I thought, oh, that's kind of a neat hat to have. So I grabbed one as a souvenir.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Growing up, I was a huge fan. I had a friend whose dad was making a balsa wood de Havilland beaver. I've never been in one, but I've always wanted to go up, and I think that's just one of the most epic planes. And I wasn't sure what was on there. That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, I
But
agree. I
yeah,
love that airplane. I like the old radial engine and the thunderous noise it makes. To me, that's classic.
yeah, absolutely. So tonight we were just sitting down with one of the finest flyers in Muskoka to chew the breeze about life as a globe-trotting pilot, and who became a friend and mentor, a friend of the family and a mentor to me. I spent a couple of years, many years in the office on Santa's Village Road playing Flight Simulator and reading from the ground up. We were just talking about a member of our community, Bob Joint, when I worked at Rogers Video, who told me about From the Ground Up, and he was working on his private pilot's license at the time. And I was saying to Colin that when I was a teenager, I remember meeting or finding out that local people were into flying. And to me, it was really huge. Anytime I would see them in Rogers, which was a pretty public place, people used to rent movies, but it was just a chance to connect. So for me, I think even now, most of these questions are still things that I'm really interested in. And that's why I'm doing this. And I think a commercial flight is something that more and more people are doing more regularly. If they haven't, it's definitely increased since I was a kid. In Home Alone, the dad goes, when I was a kid, the only flying we ever did was in the back of the family station wagon.
Over the hills.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I'm pretty sure my uncle fell out of the back of the station wagon. True story. Brutal. It was the 1940s, though. Yeah. So,
Yeah, you're dating yourself now talking about working at Rogers Video.
well, that's it. But I love to share those stories because that's how much I learned from people's good graces. I talk a lot about Adam Schultz, who's a Canadian adventurer and author, and a lot of his books, he talks about these strangers, and he gets into these tough spots in his solo adventures where he goes. And there's seemingly always somebody, a local, who comes onto his path, and he figures out a way. And people who, there's just always something in the universe that works out. So I think that's interesting.
Is he an author? Because I'd like to read
Yeah,
some of his stuff.
yeah, he's so the history of Canada in 10 maps. He talks all about the first, the earliest 10 maps, into the development all the way back from Turtle Island of the indigenous peoples through history. And where he really locked me was, as someone who's an avid historian, I needed to learn more, or what at least caught me was the whole presentation of Samuel de Champlain, which I talk about a lot with my history episodes, because he crossed the ocean, I think, 34 times in total, building New France as a colony, but 3 to 4 weeks at least each time. But he was the first guy or explorer to see it as a place to stay. And I think something like the first winter, they had 70 or 80 guys in Quebec. And come the spring, there was only 20 of them left. They had starved or died of scurvy.
Wow.
And growing up, I loved Canadian history. And a big thing I noticed is that a lot of people would be like, oh, yeah, the Canadian, Canada's boring compared to the Star Spangled Banner, or, Canadian history is boring. And I would sort of, in grade 7 or whatever, I learned about the coureur de bois and these, the indigenous fur trade. And I said, well, man, if you showed up on a boat and saw a wall of forest, and I don't know if you've ever watched like those TV shows Alone or Naked and
Yeah.
Afraid,
Yeah.
but it's literally like, how did anybody make a go of it here? Try walking outside and surviving the winter. So when you look at how it all happens and you realize like people, oh, Canada's so peaceful. It's like, no. And now with what's going on, it's global, but specifically with tariff wars and people are thinking a lot about politics. But my goal through the history part of the show is to show that when we learn history, the stuff around us changes, but the human reaction to things like fear and our emotions don't. So when we learn history, we can find comfort or knowledge. And that's again why I think having you here, as opposed to having, this is Jamie at Canadian Grit. Let me tell you about flying. I'm the authority on flying. Let me tell you about being a commercial pilot. And so I've never thought that was a good thing. And many people in our society, parents too, to kids will say, well, you should be an engineer or a lawyer or a pilot. But meanwhile, the kid is saying, well, I don't know if that's what I want to do. And so somebody who's a lawyer shouldn't be consulted maybe on what's it like to fly a Dreamliner. But in
Yeah,
my life, yeah,
I was that kid in high school.
what do you mean?
That
Like just,
if the job, if I was going for a job or going to school, post-secondary school, I had to go for something that had a label already, a lawyer, a doctor, an architect. And if you weren't inclined that way, I became stagnated in my decision making. I didn't want to be one of those labels, and I didn't know there were multiple paths to jobs that I'd never even heard of yet. So I think you're right that you need exposure from people in the industry and to hear they got to where they are. Your brother's a classic example. You're a classic example. I think everybody takes a circuitous route to their
oh.
lifestyle, with a few exceptions, the lawyers, engineers, and doctors.
Well, that's it. And my years of being an educator and having the privilege of educating, going around the world and being able to build the points of view that I have to share and to say, I was more inclined by nature to ask questions, to find the pilots in Bracebridge and to network and to find out from, the horse's mouth, what is it like to fly? I can watch Top Gun and I can play Flight Simulator, but to see the experience in someone's eyes, I think now, and especially these days, we need to focus on who has experience. And there's something of value in every single person. We've become very transactional in saying, if I want to be an engineer, I'm only going to associate maybe with engineers or whatever it may be. Whereas I say it's like people are sort of starting to become like in a video game where here's Colin, an NPC, which is a non-player computer. And so you walk up and you're like, you hit up, left, or right, and it's like Colin is selling books, pens, or erasers. And I say, well, I don't want any of those things, so you just walk away. Whereas actually, if I sat down with you for this amount of time and just, if I were sitting next to you on a bus and everyone has on their cell phones, but say the bus breaks down. The best stories come from what in the moment I think seem the hardships. And I think that's what life, we associate trauma. But I'm in my own work with Gabor Mate and trauma. I'm trying to say that trauma is a loaded word. And trauma is life. Trauma is growth. Without hardship, there is no growth. And that's why when we go through hardship, hopefully we learn how to deal with it better than when we did it the first time. But also, as a historian, I've always sort of had this inclination to, he's older than this guy, and he's saying that. I'm like, he landed on the beach. He has a really compelling story, so whatever you're saying is sort of secondary to him. There was that
Yeah,
authoritative, and again, in my theories of modern day, that's been lost with online.
yeah.
But so, and it's not about making it political. I'm just trying to say, here's value in Colin as a person, but also as here's a really cool story as a pilot that, a lot of people have encounters with pilots, and there's movies, all these things. I think look at the host of movies that come out still about flight.
Hmm.
And the 20th century we just take it so for granted that in 1904 or whatever in Kitty Hawk, the Wright brothers fly. And so 1969, I talk about the space race in another thing, is that when we move collectively, so we forget that actually for 14,000 years of human history, or what we know-ish, people looked at the sky and said, wow, imagine being a bird. And then in 1904, which is, not that long ago. Within 65 years, they're on the moon. JFK in 62 goes, "Oh, we will go to the moon because we choose to." And America's like, "Sweet, let's do it." And they did it,
Yeah.
and
Amazing progress in a short period of time, isn't it?
yes, and that's why I say if we look at that history and what we've accomplished since 1969, it's not to say that digital technology it's revolutionary, and but people are resisting so hard. But that's why we need people who are in the industries with the experience, because if you know the chronology of your craft, like flight, you can more easily predict where it's going to go. So if I were, an AI consultant, your value, Colin, I would say to you, okay, well, you need to help me with this. Your insights are so valuable. And that's what people are missing in kids, because parents say, well, you should be a dentist. And meanwhile, their parents are whatever. And it's like, well, why didn't you become a dentist?
Right.
Right? What did your parents want you to become?
Yeah.
Right? And we
Isn't
sort
it?
of, that's the perpetuation of the cycle.
Right.
Um, so I just say here's a cool story, and I think it's very interesting to hear about. In my life, it's as a storyteller, I could talk to a brick wall. My brother Jeremy. Speaking of this, this is a great segue back to you, because this is about you. But I was living in Germany when I was 25 for a couple of months in Bremen doing my master's, and I got to work at the European Swiss Marktschule. Was this really cool opportunity, and Jeremy had just got a first job at an energy firm. Anyways, I flew in at the end of my stay in Bremen, and I stayed in London where he was living with his pal Shane, and then he and Karina and me flew to Ireland in Cork. And it was funny because just before we're about to take off out of probably Stansted, wherever Ryanair flies out of, I'm sitting there talking to this elderly lady, and she's sharing with me, "Oh, I'm very, in Irish, I'm very sort of nervous about flying." And I said, "Oh, no problem." And then she gets to the point, she's like, "If you wouldn't mind just holding my hand during the takeoff and landing." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah," very sweet, like, innocent lady. And I'm talking, and I look over, and Jeremy and Karina were sort of like kitty corner back, and Jeremy's just shaking his head laughing, right? And Jeremy, and I'm like, "What are you laughing about?" And he goes, "Oh, I told Karina here that you'd be best friends with whoever you were sitting with 5 minutes in."
Here you are holding her hand.
Exactly. And the story remains, and the fact that I remember that story is just, yeah.
You
Uh,
should alter it a little bit and say it wasn't a little old lady.
yeah, yeah. Well, no, I had to alter it for, certain purposes. So maybe it wasn't a little old lady. Hey, what happens in Cork? All right, buddy.
Yeah, well, you kissed the Blarney Stone, didn't you?
I'm gonna keep the cork, and I'm gonna keep the cork in the bottle. So let's hop into it. With your career in flight, maybe you just start from whatever you're willing to. How did you become? You spoke a little bit about, and I'm like you. I find every 5 years or so, I feel like I get to a point of learning. I'm like, okay, what's next? And so, how did you end up instead of being engineer or one of those other things? How did it end up at pilot?
It's not the typical route that others have taken to being a pilot. I wasn't particularly good in high school. I mostly lost interest when I was in my mid-teen years. Distractions that come along at that age, 15, 16. And I lost interest in school. And I think part of that was due to the fact that, as we talked about earlier, I didn't have a label for a job that I wanted to pursue. So that indecisiveness just led me to lose interest in school in general. And as a result, I ended up failing high school. So I moved on to the work world afterwards, and the job I got was building airplanes at a McDonnell Douglas plant that no longer exists in Toronto, but it was factory work, assembly line work. And I did that for a couple of years and realized pretty quickly I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So I went back to summer school and got my high school diploma. And then I was off to the races. I thought, okay, I applied to a couple of universities and so on. And then I had hurt myself at work, and I got a fairly large check at the time in a lump sum. And I was driving home from work one day by the Brampton Flying Club, the airport there. And I thought, I wonder if I could go flying one day. So I drove in, and the guy said, yeah, come on back tomorrow morning. So I went back there the next morning, gave him my money, went up for a flight, and I was in love, absolutely in love with it. I thought,
That
I
was
mean,
the
it was a bit of a,
was that the first
uh,
time you'd ever flown?
yeah, I think I did some sort of introductory flight when I was in grade two or something.
Yeah. Okay.
It wasn't really anything that lit any flame or something. something. But uh, I was a bit of a daredevil in those days, and I thought flying would be sort of the next step. So anyway, I started flying with a guy who was a terrific instructor. I really liked the guy. He was a graduate from an aviation college in Toronto. I started by flying with him, and I got to the point where I was ready to go for my private pilot license. And before I did, he said to me, because he could see my interest, we talked a lot, and he said, if you really want to do this for a living, save your money and go to one of the aviation schools or join the military, but don't waste your money here anymore because this will take you forever, cost you a fortune, and it won't ultimately lead to the job you think it will.
Mm.
So that was the last day I flew with him, and I didn't even know about these aviation colleges. So I threw my name in a hat, applied to there were 3 at the time. I only knew about 2 of them, so I applied to the 2 I knew about, and I got accepted into both of them, and, one was a 3-year course, the other was a 2-year course, and being a naturally lazy guy, I took the 2-year course, and
What?
then
So what
I
are we
did it.
talking here? So you finished. You were like 18 or so, and this is like 2005.
I was actually 21.
Yeah, 21.
It was in 1981, so it was actually in January of 1981, if I look back at my logbook.
Uh,
That was when I did my first introductory flight, and then I got accepted into this college in August of '81. So anyway, that was my path. After I got out of college, then I kind of started my flying career in earnest.
mm-hmm. And so from there, like, and I mean, yeah, you can talk later about like how the industry has changed, but at the time, to get on with an airline, what was sort of the standard? Like, I mean, you hear what you need 3,000 hours or something generally, or before you can apply. I don't know. And that was something that I heard because when I was looking at all this stuff, it was 2005, 2004, and what you read in the news is there's a real shortage of pilots. But back then, did you have to work for a smaller airline and then work your way up to one of the bigger commercial airlines?
Well, back in the early '80s, there were no jobs. There were more pilots than there were jobs, and so we graduated 15 of the guys in our course, and 2 of us got jobs. A couple of them went into the military afterwards. But there were no jobs. So any job that you did get, it's the old supply and
Yeah.
demand thing, right? So I was
Well,
lucky enough.
in the early 80s, I was just going to add that was, I think, probably a pretty good time of funding. They bought all the F-18s and stuff in 82-ish. So, I mean, things were probably that would have been, well, that was the reason I went RMC was because it was, again, you looked at the flight costs and what it took, and military is still the most viable option for that
Yeah, and
most of the time.
my first choice was the military, and I applied to the military, but I didn't make it through because of the medical aspect. I had been in a bad motorcycle accident when I was 18, and that beat my leg up pretty badly, and I wouldn't have got through basic training, as they said. And so that hope was dashed at that time. But the guys that did go into the military got onto the F-18s. All the guys from our course that went in, I think there were 3 of them, they all got on F-18s, which to me was a dream come true. But you know what?
Absolutely.
Life throws forks in the road for you. And so I didn't go that route. I got out and hit the bricks, banging on doors, trying to find a job. And I got a job. It wasn't a very good job. It was an instructor job, and the company wasn't particularly good, but supply and demand also dictates wages. And so I was working for next to nothing. I couldn't even pay my rent. Luckily, I was married, and my wife was making more money on unemployment insurance than I was making flying by leaps and bounds. But, by the same token, I wouldn't have been able to be a pilot had it not been for the government assistance that I got. Because I come from a very humble background. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, and my parents were immigrants, and we did a lot of moving around. But when I applied to the college, I discovered that they had, in those days, OSAP had grants as well as loans, and a grant just meant that you didn't have to pay it back.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my only chance to get through. So I got a grant for the entire amount of my training, and it was a lot. I mean, it was all subsidized in the first place, so it wasn't that the guys that didn't get grants were paying astronomical prices. But what it did do is it allowed me to attend college for 2 years without an income. So I
Wow.
I thank
Yeah. Well, that's it,
thank
right?
the
Like,
the
wow. Yeah.
times, and I've got no problems paying my taxes when required because I've seen the benefit that taxes have.
Well, and I'm an OSAP guy, and I used to stand in the line, and all those kids, and that's I recently saw a meme, and it said it was a picture of somebody. It's like, oh, how did you discover this? And the tagline says, well, it's amazing what happens when you allow everybody to have education and not just the richest people. And that's also part of my, my own shtick, or you want to call it my agenda of Canadian Grit, is to democratize any sort of knowledge, because ultimately what you're presenting is a lifetime so far of lived knowledge and experience, and the agglomeration of like the best highlights of your whole life of all these thousands of people you've met. And that's my looking at you as a historian. I would even say, from a future perspective, if I came across a video like this, I'd be like, oh man, this is here's a firsthand source of what it was like to be a commercial pilot. Maybe down the road somebody will talk about how commercial airlines went from airplanes to rocket ships, and they'll be like, here's Colin Clark, who discussed how aviation changed from the 80s until the early 2000s.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's again, that's how I think, but it's fun to talk about all of this stuff, because going back to the original point is that the public funding of OSAP or all of those things, that's how progress is, through creation and opportunity giving to people who otherwise wouldn't have them, in my opinion.
absolutely right. Absolutely
So
right. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you don't have potential.
that's
Anyway,
right.
so after I got this first job as an instructor, I didn't last at that very long. It was too abusive. They were bullying me, and I don't take kindly to bullies. I think that comes from moving every few years as a young guy. You stand up to bullies because everybody wants to put you in your place when you get to a new town or a new school. So when I stood up to these guys, I just left, and then
That's
I
why
got out
I
of
never
flying.
that's why I never messed with you.
Yeah. You'd have taken me in a heartbeat. But I got out of flying again for a couple of years, and then I was working again at this same aircraft manufacturer, again, knowing full well I couldn't possibly do this the rest of my life. And I had applied to a couple of colleges to choose another profession. And I'd been accepted, and I was starting in September, and my wife and I drove out to the Yukon, and on our way out, we had a lot of time to talk. And she said to me at that time, I think you're making a big mistake. She said, I think you'll spend the rest of your life looking up in the sky wondering, what if? So I
Mm,
said to her, well, what should I do? And she said, let's take the money that you save to go to school and renew your licenses and give it another shot. I did. That was in 1986. And by 1988, I was working for a major airline. So I got really lucky with the way things turned out.
well, no risk, no reward, and that's ultimately it too, right? So just that right there, to share that bit of wisdom, because again, in our modern culture, we see influencers, and it's not linear, like you said, this circuitous, and how much that the love that your wife Kathy showed in that again is a whole other philosophy of people have lost the idea of that love is about giving and not getting, and that there was an investment and a risk taken, but therefore, synchronicity or the universe or whatever you want to call that, there was a reward. But again, you had a choice, right? And that choice, and from my point of view, hearing that story, I'm like, wow. Because again, and that's what people need to hear. What are you willing to do? And all these people who are like, "Oh, I could have been Pele of soccer. I could have been Sidney Crosby." It's like easier said than done. You could be your age and saying, "I could have been a pilot," and be like, "Okay, sure, Colin." But but that's reality. You went to the majors of flight
Well,
by
it's the support you get too. And sometimes
that's it.
I
That we
wouldn't
don't
say
do it
listen
alone.
to everybody and what you should do, but sometimes the people closest to you have a better, by standing outside the situation, they have a better perspective on what would be best for you. What it
Interesting.
takes
Yeah.
is to listen rather than be bullheaded about it and say, I know best what's best for me. Sometimes it takes somebody with a sort of an external eye to look at you and say, you know what, I don't think you're going to be happy doing this.
Yeah.
They see the joy in the things that you do and say this would bring you joy and encourage you to follow your path. And really, in my career, I never worked a day in my life because I loved flying. When I went to work, I loved doing what I did, and so it wasn't work. So if any young person, no matter whether they want to be a pilot, a dentist, or any other unlabeled occupation, and find something that they love to do. I know it's cliche, but if you forward to getting up to go to work every day, that's not work at all. It's the guys, and there's a lot of them in my industry, and understandably, there's guys that just don't want to quit. They don't want to retire because they love their job so much. I was one of those guys too. The argument is that in that line of work, there is a limit to your best before date. And my argument was simply, look, I'm going to love it just as much when I'm 85 as I am when I'm 55. So you have to make the transition sometime. Having said that, I loved it just as much on my last flight as I did on my first flight. And I think that's the sign of a good career for any young person starting out.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's really the dream, and I think too, if we go back to the roles, right? We try to say this is a successful career, but you don't become successful by the label of the career. You become successful by finding a passion. It's a Japanese concept, ikigai, that I talk about. It's getting the whatever you do wherein you lose time, like gardening for me, or teaching, or talking, or storytelling, or writing, or drawing. So how can you in some way combine that? And I say this to students, don't give up on the arts, because even if you're going to be an engineer, you need to know how to express yourself well.
Hmm.
The arts, I say that's a minimalize it. We should call it the humanities, because
Yeah,
everybody needs to know how to communicate emotional intelligence. And that's exactly, we don't have to go it alone. And by also sharing that, so many people are just trying to go it alone, and just sharing your anecdote of that is beautiful. And it shows how, it is a journey of many people to get you where you are.
absolutely.
Yeah, and if you combine all of those things, it is possible, but it just may take a little bit longer, but don't give up on that, right? And that's a lot of people say that, but it's easier
Well,
said
it's
than done.
cliche as well. If it was easy to do, everybody be doing it. So it's those challenges.
It is absolutely. But that's it, and that's is how badly you want it, and that's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
when you first started, you made that big leap and it took a huge risk, and then you got in a couple years later with the big airlines. What were you first flying on, or what was your route? What were you doing, sort of
I
generally?
was on an international airplane. The job I had was called a second officer. In that day and age, there were three guys in the cockpit. I was the third guy, the junior guy, and I looked after the systems for the aircraft: heating, air conditioning, electrical, hydraulic. Those systems were all controlled by the flight engineer or the second officer. So I did that, and we used to fly mostly in that airplane. We do Asia, South America, and Europe. And then I had a really fortunate thing happen. A year after I got hired, Swiss Air came looking for some second officers. They had a need for a couple of dozen second officers, and they came to our airline and said, would anybody be interested in working for Swiss Air for a 2-year contract? Yeah, I mean, I was young, I had nothing to lose, so I took the job. The deal was we'd go away for 18 days and then we'd be off for 12. And I had a newborn son, and my wife stayed at home, and I'd go away for 18 days and fly the Swiss Air network and then come home for 12. And that was the best job I ever had in my life.
Not really.
Just
So
because
wait, the job you got fired from, was that the one that led to your first commercial job in '88 or whatever that you mentioned? Was Swiss
no,
Air?
I didn't. No, no, and I didn't get fired, to be clear. I quit. And then I came back after renewing my licenses, and I got a job flying a cargo plane. You know that line in Top Gun where he
I
says
love
you'd be
it.
flying
Yeah.
rubber dog shit in a cargo plane? That's what I was flying in an old Beach 18. Good times, good
That's
times,
amazing. Yeah,
freezing
yeah,
my
yeah.
tail feathers off.
That's
And then I
amazing.
got done with one of the commuter airlines, like it would be the equivalent of Jazz Airlines today. And then from there, I got on with the airline, with major airline. And then after a year there, things were slowing down. And that was in the late 80s, early 90s, and things had slowed down. And so the airline could spare a few of us. And so I took a leave of absence for 2 years and went to Swiss Air and flew their network, which was substantially broader than what we had in Canada. Like we flew to the four corners of the earth. It was an amazing experience. And in those days, you didn't have 24-hour layovers. You had a week. So you'd have a week in Nairobi, a week in Hong Kong, a week in You pick a spot, Rio, and so that was what I lived for.
Did you have to fly from Toronto to Switzerland and then fly from there, or
Yeah, yeah. So we'd start our 18 days in Toronto. We'd fly to Zurich, and then
Zurich?
we
Okay, Zurich.
and then we'd do our flying. So it was usually out and back. So we'd do about 2 or 3 trips a month, and then we'd go home. So we'd fly back to Toronto, and then you'd have 12 days, and then you just do it again. And they had a more social scheduling system, so all the nice destinations were spread out among all the pilots, as opposed to the North American way, which is based on seniority. So I would consider it a little bit unfair, but it depends on your leanings, whether you're a right wing guy or a left wing guy. And it's pretty
Yes.
obvious I leaned left. So
Yeah.
the beauty of that was that in the 2 years, I got to experience every destination that Swiss Air flew to that I was interested in going to. And a lot of that was Africa. So Africa and India, for that matter, those are the kind of destinations that they can be life changing when you have time there to truly visit. Now we'd stay in 5-star hotels, but if you had a week, you'd get out of the hotel and you'd go off on some adventure somewhere where you got
Sure.
away
Yeah.
from the luxury of the hotels. And then I came back from that. And when I came back from that, the 2-year contract ended, and I was now laid off. There was no more leave of absence. I was laid off, and I got a phone call out of the blue one day from a guy who was a headhunter, and said, "Would you like to work in Holland for the next few years?" And so I jumped on a flight 2 days later, and I moved my family to Amsterdam, and we lived there for 2.5 years. And then we did the same sort of thing because they were a charter company, and they did mostly ad hoc cargo. And so
Okay.
one day you'd be flying day-old chickens, the next day you'd be flying fighter airplanes that were broken into parts, and it was beautiful. It was fantastic variety, and it was exciting, and every day you went to work was different. So
Yeah.
that leads
Cool.
into how fun it was to go to work. You never knew what was coming tomorrow.
That's right. And by that point, like, would you say how many airplanes would you have worked on like regularly until that point? And
I was still on the DC-10.
were
So I
you?
was still on the same airplane. We were now about 6 years into my career.
Yep.
And when that contract ended, the airline was calling us back from layoff, and that's when the first time I got to fly an airplane. I wasn't the third guy in the cockpit. Now I was the co-pilot. So I flew the 737 in those days. Yeah, so that was the last time I was able to work overseas. Yeah, it was nice to see a different way of doing things. Every airline thinks they invented flying, so this gave you an idea of what other ideas there are out there, different ways of doing things, and it made you broader
Healthy.
minded.
Yes, it's
It
healthy
is
to be.
very
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
very much.
Well, it's like a probably I don't know a franchise player if you're always on the same team, but how flexible are you on different teams, right? And there's always those back benchers who will say, "What would Gretzky be without Mark Messier and Yari Curry?" I don't know. The reality is, it was what it was.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, that's
It
so
teaches
cool.
you to be open minded. When you see other ways of doing things and you don't have any control over changing it, or you have to learn to accept it. As time passes, you start to think of that as being the best way.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and so those experiences start to change your mind and open you up to better ways of doing things. Not everything was better, but there were aspects of it that if you can bring it back to the airline you're working for, you can make uh, a mix of the good of both of them. It's difficult to do, but
yeah,
at least
yeah,
you have in your own mind what would be a better option.
for sure. And I had a question there that was nowadays, how do you explain to people again the third officers like the flight engineer on what would be a cargo plane, right? But certain planes still have a flight engineer or multiple, depending on the aircraft. But when you're looking at commercial airliners and you don't really see the third, is all that
No, that
no?
guy's being taken out by automation. The Russian guys probably have flight engineers still, and a very old airplane.
Yeah, yeah. You pay and then
There's
you pump. You pay and then you pump.
yeah, that's very true. And some of I mean, there are DC-10s still flying, but the automation now has eliminated that job.
Are there any MiGs still flying? Tell us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't know.
Have you
But
ever done any negative G pushovers and given anybody the finger? Yeah. Get to the
I
answers
thought
we all want to hear, man.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, my flying was boring.
Colin's been so humble. He's the first guy to ever fly inverted with 300 people on a
Yeah,
Dreamliner.
right.
Yeah.
Only in the simulator.
Yeah. That's awesome. So again, so he's been replaced by a lot of like avionics or computer stuff. And so back then, though, what was sort of the transitional piece that got you from the third seat to the second seat? Is it just like
Just
time in the plane?
seniority.
Yeah,
Just seniority. When your
yeah.
number came up, if you wanted to make a move, you could. It's the same as going from the right seat to the left seat, or the co-pilot to the captain, or the first officer to the captain. It's all based, there's no merit. It's not a meritocracy. It's only seniority. So,
Mm.
and then you're not forced to move up. If you get to a senior position and you've got the best of everything in that position, a lot of guys stay there until they're senior enough to move to the next position with the same sort of seniority, relative seniority.
How many hours would you say, maybe just, spitball, how many hours would you say you had before you felt like you were stable or secure as a pilot in the industry?
Honestly, you're never stable in that line of work. I would say that, I mean, even right up until like there's bankruptcies that creates instability
Yeah,
and
yeah,
uncertainty.
yeah.
If your company goes bankrupt and you're on the street and you join another airline, you're right back at the bottom of the list. So
That's
it's
tough,
there's
yeah,
jeopardy. Yeah, it's like when you get into this line of work, you have to know that there's a lot of jeopardy just
yeah.
lurking in the background, whether it's your health or the economic welfare of an airline that you have no control over. Those sorts of things, they're very real, but you probably aren't thinking about them when you're chasing your dream of flying an airplane.
Well, that's it, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just, again, you see the video of the cool landings and whatever, right? And
Yeah,
it's
it's a
true. It's
it's a
idealized.
journey. Yeah, it's a journey. I mean, it's all the fun, the group, the best part of my job was the flying. It was the stuff outside the flying that took a toll, whether it was bankruptcies, mergers, layoffs. There were so many influences, but looking back, it's easy to say it was a great career. There's lots of
Yeah,
guys who
that's
didn't
right.
survive those things and didn't have the same career. So there's a lot of luck in life in general. I know I'm getting philosophical now, but flying
No, but that's,
airplanes is no different than anybody else.
well, and the number of pilots and the number of, even like you say, going back to earlier, because my experience, all the way back to grade 4, I saw Apollo 13. I wanted to be an astronaut. I met Colonel Chris Hadfield at RMC, and he talked to a small
Cool.
number of us. I was just to meet, like I told you earlier, if you want to meet a mechanic, I always wanted to be an astronaut in the worst way. And for me, I still have a signed picture that says, Jamie, aim high, the sky is not the limit. But, when you meet someone like that who's NASA and he's talking about all these planes using, I'm just like, okay, wow, it's just another realm of, but again, the number of guys, it's like the number of guys who make the AHL or the farm team just below the Blue Jays, and and they're so chock full of talent, but they never get there either. Right.
Hmm.
And so again, there is luck, but is it our path? But again, how much you wanted it and that you loved it and that it all worked out.
And
Because even
it's
if
the
it,
journey too. Even if you
yeah,
don't make it to being an astronaut, you might get to a position, whether you're flying fighter jets or you're even flying with an airline. Like I wanted to be an astronaut too. Then I was going to be satisfied with a fighter pilot. And I ended up being quite happy as just a boring old bus driver on an airliner. So
yeah.
you shoot for the stars and then life kind of gets in the way, if you like, whether it's
Yes,
family or what
yes.
it is. But the thing is,
That
you're in
like
a line of work that you love.
passion. Yeah, you
Yeah.
start with the passion. That's what I say to kids. Like, even if you're not going to get a job drawing, okay, but look at jobs that involve drawing. That takes work. But how can you keep the passions and knowing that there are going to be downfalls and hardships? The passion of I love flying, that allowed everything else to sort of, float, and you were able to react based out of the passion. But like a lot of educators say, not particularly me, that the best is when you get to close your door and everything else is quiet, right? Because you're doing the real job.
Yeah.
And that's so many jobs. There's always bull. But again, what helps you put up with the bull that nobody talks about is it doesn't matter the paycheck, because ultimately if you slogged to be, and that's why I say, I don't think you can just go fake your way through medical school or dentistry. If you don't like blood, you need to be honest with yourself at a young age. I'm not going to be a doctor.
And,
Um,
I was reading Mark Carney's book Values the other day, and he quoted the quote is attributed to Albert Einstein, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something to the effect of, "The things in life that count often can't be counted, and the things that can be counted often don't count." And that's what I think people have to realize is when they're chasing a dream, they have to put all those things aside that don't matter. The things that are emotional, whether it's passion or a love of something, those should be the things that come to the forefront. Never
yeah.
mind what kind of money you're going to make or not going to make.
That you need emotional sustenance, and that's again back to my whole PhD is on the sustainable coping strategies for public educators. And so if the system's not changing, but so Dr. Gabor Mate, there was a nurse when we saw him, she stands up and says, I don't know if I can, I see all this happening, and he goes, look, there's pain either way. You stay in the job, you leave. If it's costing you too much to stay, if it's costing you your health, you need to leave. And it's like people in a relationship, and that's just what's not valued, is we think it's always pleasure, but it's like, no, no, no. If you're in a bad relationship, it's pain to stay, it's pain to leave. If you're in a good job, or say a bad job, great pay, but if you feel soulless or whatever, it's all very personal, right? And hearing you is like what got me here to the podcasting is ultimately I love teaching and I love interacting with people. Did I ever think that I would be a teacher? No. I thought I would be an astronaut. And when I didn't get there, because all I was focused on was RMC. And again, when you get, it's the Joker in Batman, he goes, you're like a dog chasing a car. You don't know what you do when you actually get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's most people. It's like, well, when you actually get all of that, and I say, then what?
Yeah, yeah.
You eventually have a mansion or 400 houses and you can only be in one and you're in a room by yourself alone. What do you got? And see,
Hmm.
that's what everybody's running from. But again, I say find meaning in what you're doing, because then everything else will fall into place. And that's, I think, more often what we can be finding in people like you, where it's like, oh, well, here's an influencer, Jamie Jackson, pilot from Air France here. And, I just keep putting up these really huge, cool videos of me flying over the ocean and telling people they should become pilots. Well, it's kind of really misleading to young people. Are you really influencing them? I don't know.
And you're not telling the whole story.
That's it.
It's
That's
easy
it.
to make yourself, very few people are willing to make themselves look bad as an
Yes,
influencer. And just because he's making a video of himself flying an airplane, first of all, doesn't mean he's a good pilot. Second of all, it doesn't mean he's a nice guy to fly with. It just means he knows how to fly the airplane and what buttons to push. But there's so much more to it that
that's it. Yeah, D for degree and all these, and so and as an educator in various different things, in my experience with educators, a thing that's been noted is a lack of value, and saying, well, whatever, I'll just pass. And I say, okay, let's just pause for a second. You're going in for brain surgery. Do you know if your neurologist is the head of his class or the bottom of his class? The guy who just said D for degree, pass. And I said, wait, don't answer. I'm going to push you a little bit farther. If you knew and you had the choice, would you choose the guy who studied every night? And see, that's what we're not telling the kids,
right.
or people aren't telling kids,
Yeah.
and so everything seems so easy, and it's like, no, no, no. You don't just get everything at 25 and then what, you sit there and stare at the wall, and that's not the
And the other
point.
thing is, no matter how good you are, committed you are, passionate you are, luck plays a huge role in the outcome.
Yeah,
In my case, I can say that luck came down my way several times over the course of my career. If one of those things changed and I wasn't lucky in a certain situation, everything would have turned out differently and might have actually changed my attitude towards my career.
that's it. And yeah,
So it's the same in anything, if luck doesn't come your way and you end up changing your mind, you may feel like a failure, but you're not. I think when that fork in the road comes and you don't get the break, you go down the other fork with all you've got.
that's right. And that's adapting, and that's finding, that's I would say that's grit. Like,
Yeah, right.
And so when you don't necessarily get what you want, you look at, okay, well, what have I built and where can I go from here? Okay, well, and then when you look back and you say, well, look, it's easy to say from my perspective, but ultimately you built it. That's respectable because it wasn't easy, and it is easier now with the rosy shades to say, oh yeah, I had a career as a pilot, blah 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 blah. But when you break it down, I say it's easy to look at the influencer, but if you want to get jacked, you got to fight gravity. You got to rip your muscles. It's going to hurt. It's unavoidable. So you can sit there and dream about it, or you can start lifting the weight, and that's either academic, mental, or physical.
Absolutely right.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't matter if I talk to Tyler the comedian, me, my friends. Again, it's just a human thing that and everything is being lost in politics. And I'm saying, no, no, no. That's the problem is we're all humans. It doesn't matter. And so here's a cool human story with some experiences. What you take out of it, there's a comedian, I can't remember, he talks about a cheeseburger. And he goes, you show up, and he says, what makes a comedian funny is your own life experience. You talk to any person who goes to a comedy show and they all leave with their own idea. So he's like, I've put out the mayo, the ketchup, the mustard, and the onions, and you're going to take what you like from it and make your own burger. Everybody gets a burger, but I've made and offered the same thing, but what you've taken is based on your own reality.
That's a good analogy.
It is, I know, and you can't standardize living. And this is why I love biopics and I love reading about people I really care
Yeah.
about. But when it comes to influencing and people who try to emulate another's success, it's like, here's Colin's book on how to be a pilot. And I'm like, okay, I'm Jamie and I'm going to study Colin's book and I'm going to follow that path. And that's the lie, because you can't be Dwayne The Rock Johnson. You can't be Axl Rose. You can't, because they made their path.
Yeah.
And I think people believe that they can, do it but it's like, no, 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 you got to make your own. And it's hard.
And it's arrogant, I think, on the part of the person that writes those books or paths, if you like, to think that it'll work for everybody. That if you just follow what I did, you'll be as smart as I am, good as I am, successful.
Paternalistic, and that's why we are where we are, and that's why we have people who aren't mechanics yelling about, that's an alternator. And as an educator, the most frustrating thing is people want it until they don't. And I say, okay, well, I'm an educator with my experiences. I'm sharing with you. And it's like, if the mechanic were to tell you you need a new alternator, Colin, would you stand there and scream at him and say to him, it's the transmission? But this is
Yeah.
what the whole society, nobody
Yeah.
wants to make the coffee, nobody wants to make the hamburger, but they'll be willing to stand there and criticize the hamburger or the guy who's trying to make it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I find that's the thing I'm sort of trying to at least say that's going on. It's like, no, 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 we have people, everything's here. And then again, we get an arrogant culture who doesn't know that they're arrogant. It's a fish
Yeah.
in water. And, I talk about that in the podcast, but back to your experiences, because this is where flying, I mean, I imagine you had a lot of great conversations with other people you were flying with, right?
Well, that's the beauty of it. I mean, you're always flying with a different guy. You never, I mean, you once in a blue moon, you'd fly with the same guy, but the conversations and the people you meet, because although we're doing the same job, we've all had a different journey to get there. Yeah, there's good guys and bad guys like in any job. And not that they're good or bad, it's that they're like-minded or interesting to talk to or have good stories. The
Mhm.
funny thing is, we had a saying, I'd rather be on a lousy layover with a good guy than a good layover with a lousy guy. The personalities are really what makes the job fun. The guys you're working with, and think about it. These are conversations you're having when you're almost at your lowest point on your circadian clock. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. You can barely keep your eyes open, but you're having this interesting conversation that kind of keeps you involved and awake. And then those are the guys that you remember. If there's 5,000 pilots, uh, you fly with them over the course of your career. You might fly with, I don't know, maybe 1,000. I don't know if that's a realistic number. And of that 1,000, if you remembered 50 from the layovers you did together, I think that speaks volumes to the kind of person that you were flying with and how well you got along.
Yeah, absolutely. And the circadian rhythm, especially when when you're traveling. Wow, and when stresses are high, that absolutely personalities in my own research, personalities is a big thing in any industry. How people, yeah, are they a quote unquote company person? Are they a personable person? They're, yeah,
Well,
it
we do,
dictates so much. Yeah.
and we do training in that. They call it cockpit resource management, and you learn about your own weaknesses and strengths, and you can identify those in other people, and you learn pathways to overcome them, ways to interact that you get the job done efficiently without, say, demeaning somebody because they did the wrong thing in a critical situation, that sort of thing. So we get trained in that, which is I think priceless.
Well, that is priceless. That should be in any in personnel management when stakes are high, and in various public sector, even in healthcare. I mean, there is training absolutely, but just to assume that everyone knows how to deal with this, what is perceived as a crisis or what is perceived as anything, that again is open to interpretation, and again on your personality as well will make you easier, better, whatever to communicate with other people.
Yeah, knowing yourself is an important part of how to deal with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in those scenarios, right? So when you go back to that, what like some of those conversations, do you think when you're looking out the window, do you think a lot of conversations were sparked by what you were looking at out the window, or I guess it all depends, but when
It's
you're
funny. It's almost like you have a standard rapport when you first meet each other. So, do you have kids? Where do you live? That sort of stuff. And from those sort of standard set of questions, you either get a conversation going or you don't. And if you don't get a conversation going, you probably won't get one going for the rest of the night. But that if the counterpart to this conversation recognizes that you're just trying to break the ice and have a conversation and they open up and you start talking about stuff, that's when the ball gets rolling. Rarely, usually we say if you're looking out the window, if you're staring out the window into space, you don't want to be bothered. It's like body language for the other guy saying, leave me alone. I don't
yeah,
like
yeah,
you or I'm
yeah.
not interested in talking to you.
That like with and again, there's just a random question in my head. So you're just on a constant rotation. There's no consistency, sort of in crew or anything like that.
No, what happens, Jamie, is because it's a seniority system, we have a bidding system every month for the kind whatever flying's available, and the most senior guy gets what he wants, and then all the way down to the bottom guy who gets nothing he wants. And I might like layovers in Santiago, and somebody else likes layovers in Hawaii. I might not get all the Santiago layovers. I might just get two, and then I get some in London or something. And so that mixture of destinations works on in all the seats, whether you're the captain, the first officer, or the relief pilot, and all those kind of jumble. Sometimes you'll fly. Like if I really like Santiago and I'm the number one guy, and the number two, the number one captain also likes Santiago, then the two of us could fly together the whole month. I never had that. To me, that would be boring
Hmm.
because if you're sitting in an airplane with a guy for 16 hours each way, there's not a lot to talk about on Tuesday when you go back to work and do the
Yeah.
16 hours again. So it's nice to
Cool.
have that variety.
Yeah. That's hilarious. I guess air commercial airliners have different like fleets, right? So whatever plane you're flying has a max distance, and so within the pool of wherever that plane can go, that's where it is. That's how that
So
works.
so they buy airplanes for specific purposes. On the domestic stuff, they buy the smaller airplanes that do the North American flying, and that has a network of destinations anybody on that airplane goes to one of those destinations. The international airplanes, the same thing applies. They buy a 787 to fly to Hong Kong. And those flights are like, they're so long, they can't just have one 787. They actually have to buy three. And then the third one doesn't. So the reason they have three is two of them are actually passing in the air. Another one's got to be ready to go. So it doesn't actually
Uh,
fly the full amount of time in a month, so they have to juggle their schedule to utilize them. And so they'll mix long trips with short trips. So the 787, for example, would do long trips to Asia someplace, but it would also do short hops to Europe. It'd do long trips to South America and short hops to like LA because LA at that time had a lot more traffic. And so this was a way to send one airplane down with 300 people on it as opposed to three airplanes down with 100 people on it. So they
I
buy
see.
airplanes with destinations in mind. And with, in the current situation with the change in the status of transborder stuff, they'd be rerouting those and trying to open up other markets that were within the range of our transcontinental and our domestic airplanes. So instead of flying to LA, they might fly to Mexico or
Okay,
Central
yeah.
America. So, and then when you're on that airplane, you don't switch airplanes. You stay on one airplane and that's your network. And then of course there's a seasonal change so that the destinations that that airplane flies in the winter aren't normally the same destinations they fly in the summer.
I see.
And that's how the network works.
And so those are the things I think behind the scenes that most people would just never think of. And I mean, I as a question asker, and when I see pilots going by, it's just interesting for me to see. I love that show, how it's made growing up, and it's
Oh
like
yeah.
just. And again, I sit there and I'm like, who are how did this all? The world is really fascinating to me, like going back to what I said about technology and flight, and 100 years later, the amount of people who are now flying, it's pretty nuts. And you mentioned landing at LA or whatever. What is sort of the an airline pilot like that and you're flying all over the world, are there some remarkable airports or places that you liked flying into regularly, or
Yeah.
hated flying into?
Well, the famous one, of course, is the Hong Kong approach in the old days, and you'd fly down in it. I can't remember the altitudes anymore. It's been a long time, but
Well,
they'd
I
land.
uh, I did land it. I stuck it a few times in the 747, I think, on Microsoft Flight Simulator. But this interview's not about me. It's not about me. Yeah, go ahead.
And that was
Go
really
ahead.
neat because, at low altitude, you'd be carving it around at 90 degrees to land on the runway. And you'd swear you were going right between the apartment buildings. And there used to be a
Yeah.
little old lady in her apartment, and she'd take a picture of every airplane that came in. And then by the time you got down to the hotel, you could go to this little variety store and buy a picture of your landing, an 8 by 10 color glossy picture of
No
your airplane.
way. It's
Now,
like going
how
on the
you would
ride at Canada's Wonderland.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
My
And how you
goodness.
would prove it was you flying that airplane, I don't know. And I don't know
Yeah.
why. It would have been nice to have now, but I never did because I flew in there in a couple of different airlines, and it would have been nice to have the three different
Faded and
airlines.
torn, and it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, it's definitely not me, but I'm still gonna pay you for the effort.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a neat opportunity that I should have taken up. But and then
Uh,
Bogota was always a challenge too because it's such a high altitude airport that there were always challenges that if you went in and had to do a missed approach, it was a challenging time, and there was always there was
is
challenges. It never
like
happened.
the air, or are you talking about like the actual
Yeah,
position of the runway? Oh,
no, the density altitude is what we call it.
yeah, the
It's the
density. Yeah,
temperature and the altitude all combined to create what's called density altitude. And the higher and hotter it is, the poorer the performance of the airplane. So at the point where you'd have to decide, no, we can't make this landing, we have to go around. It becomes more challenging because you have less performance out of the airplane and you're in the mountains. So you have to be careful with your navigation. It just made it challenging. So
yeah,
those sorts of things. When you're going into Hong Kong, you've been in the air for 16 hours. Yeah, you're not as enthralled with the idea of making this a challenging approach. You'd rather just keep it simple. In
yeah.
Bogota, it was only a six
Plus,
hour flight, so it was kind of fun.
you look good for your picture too. There, and after
Yeah,
16
right.
hours, you get your your makeup done.
That's what hats are for. You just stick that on your head and your hair looks
Yeah,
good.
yeah, exactly, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's too funny. With that, like with passengers in that old airport, would you give them a heads up that, oh, this is like I mean, was there ever an airport that you would just be like, hey, this one is I guess you don't
I,
like ever say this is a
I
tough airport. Yeah, they lose faith.
no, no.
Uh,
I think we just do it.
yeah,
I don't remember ever saying anything about that.
yeah,
We
yeah,
stick to the it's bumpy or it's rainy,
yeah,
but
yeah,
telling people
yeah,
it's a challenging approach, just you got to be, some people are uber scared. And so you really have to be
yeah, yeah.
careful about what you say. You really got to be a bit of a diplomat and almost hold people's hands, like you were saying earlier.
Well, I've been on a lot of flights too, right? Where and again, the captain coming out and just saying hi to people, and maybe speak to that, just about the confidence and uh meeting people and being the diplomat. Like, so what are some of the things that you maybe are trained or that you like to do as a pilot, or in those scenarios when you're meeting people? Or do you have ever have people who wanted to meet you just to because they want to tell you they're scared of flying?
Oh, absolutely. I used to do some work in the simulator with a few people that there was a program that the airline ran for people that had a fear of flying. And so what they would do, and these would be people with, high mileage people that needed to fly. There was no ifs, ands, or buts for their job. They had to fly and they were terrified. So they would take those people and run them through a simulator program. And so I would run the simulator with them and basically teach them how to fly the airplane and and then do things like kill the engine so that they know that the airplane doesn't fall out of the sky, it can glide, and then show them what we're doing up front because it's a very different perspective, of course, in the front of the airplane than it is in the back. And a lot of these people are executives, and I think that's part of the increase in disruptive passengers is executives are not the type of people that are used to giving authority to other people, having other people make decisions. So they're sitting in the back as captive audience and have no power over what's happening in the front. And so when they don't like something, they speak up. And we, on the other hand, are the opposite. Well, we're the same, really. We're sitting in the front. Don't question my authority. I've got the experience to make the decision, and you're along for the ride. So in those situations, we had people that wanted to see the cockpit. In the old days, it was great. You'd have people up in the cockpit all the time. And this simulator program that we ran for those people was really successful. In fact, I'm thinking of one woman in particular. At the end of the course, she was really happy. And what they would do is they would then send them on a flight in the jump seat because in those days you could do that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
as it turned out, just by chance, the woman that I had just done training with a few weeks prior was on my flight, sitting in the jump seat. And it was so neat to see her calmness
Yeah.
and comfort. And I hope she still flies, that she had a long career of flying to whatever meeting she was going to. But that gives you joy, is to show people that there's really nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
I think fear comes from not knowing. And when you
Yeah.
give people an education, if you're afraid of flying, try taking a flying lesson because sometimes those things you can do a familiarization flight relatively cheaply. And those situations teach you a bit about the airplane and what there is to fear and what there isn't to fear. Some people are afraid of everything, but some people are calmed by the fact that they know how an airplane works.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and it is a foreign thing, and I think a lot of people, and we've become through culture, when the first time I ever flew, well, I went in a smaller plane, but commercially, I was 15 on an exchange to France, and even in 2003, it was very different, and it was an Airbus that I was on, I remember, and a lot of the plane clapped when we landed. And then I remember the attitude changing, sort of like people being like, "Oh, look at all these losers clapping," right? And I mean, if you've never flown before and if you really respect the idea of what's happening, it's pretty miraculous in a lot of ways that something, can take off and fight gravity and float through the air at such a size when you're looking at the tonnage of these planes, and as an airplane aficionado lover, like watching Boeing planes do, when they're unloaded and they're at air shows and seeing what they're actually capable of doing, right?
Yeah.
And when you talk about that, I saw another video and a pilot goes, just the way, or it could have been you actually, one barbecue or something. Honestly, and you tell me if it was talking about how like people are scared of flying, but actually, turbulence as a phenomenon is much just like, going over bumps in your car. We don't get scared of
Yeah,
bumps,
or
right?
waves on the water. It's exactly the same. It's just you can't see them.
Yeah. And so when you think about like maybe a lot of and again it's like Jaws, right? They're just a great documentary on the 50th anniversary of Jaws, and again, a movie based on this idea of a shark. It literally led to people being terrified of sharks and killing sharks.
Hmm.
And we look at movies like, well, recently Flight with Denzel Washington. You're wearing a flight hat. One of my favorite movies. I wanted to be a bush pilot forever. And the movie The Edge, with Anthony Hopkins, and in a lot of ways that it's always like this a crazy survival thing, or the Miracle on the Hudson with Sully, and it's always these remarkable stories. But when you talk about statistics, everyone says, well, you're actually statistically safer flying hundreds of thousands of flights every day, hundreds of thousands of people. What do you think the biggest fear is that people have shared? Do you think it's turbulence, or
Hmm.
I don't
I
know?
don't know
I
if
mean, it doesn't
anybody's
really
ever
matter.
mentioned. I don't know if anybody's ever mentioned a specific fear. I
Uh,
have a feeling that they're just
just
afraid
as
in
the like
general.
flying. Yeah,
It
afraid
could
of
fall out of the
flying.
sky, it could crash on landing, could crash and take out, could hit another airplane. I think
Yeah,
people that are afraid find a reason to be afraid of everything, you know? They see these movies and so on, and
the huge lack of control.
yeah,
And that's it. Is yeah, it's so strictly monitored, and that's one of the things too. I remember learning about flying when I was a teenager, and learning about the Gimli glider, which was, you know, the plane when they switched from metric or imperial to metric, and they didn't have enough fuel for those who don't know, and the pilot flew it into an old closed down Air Force base, I think, that was being used that day for a drag race, like an a car race, and it became this epic. I think they got fired because they didn't do the calculations properly, but they tried to rerun it in simulations, and I don't know if it's like an old or a myth or whatever, but nobody else could really stick it. You know how far he was able to do, and sort of the magic of all of that. And maybe this is a great question in the advent of AI. When people say, "Oh, these airlines or these pilots or these planes will fly themselves," what do you think of the future of aviation?
I don't think anybody sitting in the back is ever going to be comfortable with a computer flying the airplane. I mean, there's too many things that go wrong with airplanes or cars or boats that weren't supposed to go wrong. And had it not been for somebody that can think and reason saving the day, there'd have been tragedy. So I don't think I could see maybe they'll go to one pilot, but even then, one pilot can't do long bomb flights
That's
and
it.
stay
Yeah.
awake. So
Yeah, and
I
second
think it's
set of
pretty
ears,
safe.
second set of eyes, second set of reason. You go back and there is always human error, but human error is probably that's what you always hear about, unfortunately, and you watch
Well,
documentaries. Yeah,
and in most cases, they'll say human error, but there's never just one cause to an accident.
that's
There's
it.
that Swiss cheese model, and it has to be more than one thing lines up for there to be an accident. Human error will be a factor, perhaps, but it won't be the only factor. And so, no matter how much you rely on the technology, I don't think people will ever be comfortable getting on an airplane to fly across the ocean with a computer in charge.
And isn't that so funny? You go back to the CEOs and these people who are used to being in control, and that's sort of our society. And that's, I think, it would just be interesting to say, what is a fear of flying? I think it's probably the complete lack of control.
Yeah.
Or, whereas people perceive control, it's just an interesting thing philosophically to think about. And as you say, being in the front is different. So, what would you say, like, what changes for those people having done a simulation or a flight in the jump seat? What changes their perspective about it?
I think, well, it's probably different for everybody, but I think it's just fear comes from the unknown. And I think
Yeah.
when
Seeing what
everybody
you're doing?
thinks, yeah, and I think everybody that has a successful flight, for example, in the simulator now thinks, whether they're right or not, they think they can do it. And
I
as
see.
soon as you think you can do it, you understand it enough that you're not afraid of it anymore. Whether
Yep.
you actually can do it or not, or you're naive enough to think that you're as good as the guy that just taught you,
Yeah, yeah.
is beside the point. The fact is that your fears have been allayed, and now you are comfortable sitting in the back knowing that the guy in the front has all these backup systems, that the airplane won't just fall out of the sky,
Yeah, I
those sort of
see what you're
things.
saying.
And all those,
Seeing the systems of protection, layers of protection that
right,
do we're not just turning this baby on and flying to Hong
right,
Kong.
right, right,
Yeah,
right.
maybe. Yeah, that's cool because again, even for me I'm just trying to think because I mean I've always wanted to be a pilot and I always I got to go up. Most of the flying I've done is commercial. I've been up in the Bell Griffin when I was in
47?
the yeah, it was pretty cool, and they took us just over like we were in Valcartier, and it was so cool being so low to the ground.
Yeah,
And he took us on some of these corners, and it was just like what it wasn't a Huey, but that was the idea of growing up watching Vietnam movies, and it was just
yeah,
these guys flying in and out, and just mad respect for those guys who flew in
yeah,
Vietnam, and
yeah. They're
I do
amazing.
remember you telling me actually at a barbecue. I think it might have been our wedding shower, and I asked you about if you'd ever flown or had any desire to fly a helicopter. You said they're so ugly they repelled from the earth or something, or
No,
that,
no, actually,
or they. It's like being on a beach ball in a pool.
Yeah, that's what they say it's like
Okay,
to fly
somebody
one, but that was what I wanted to do before I wanted to be an airline pilot.
you wanted to fly choppers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah,
my
yeah.
goal. Yeah. And
Cool.
there was at that time, I don't know if they still are, a Canadore College in North Bay had a helicopter pilots training school and applied to
Mm.
get in there. And again, what that was one of those forks in the road where I didn't get into that and I got into something else.
And when you were flying, like, what was the best time? Like, do you think like flying at night, like, so, like when you're flying around the world and all the places you've been, when you're flying over somewhere, is there a favorite place that you loved every time to look down on? I think
Greenland,
Greenland. Oh wow.
hands
Why?
down.
Yeah,
It's just gorgeous. It's unspoiled. It's the beautiful snow-covered mountains, icebergs often, depending on the season, off the shore. It's just beautiful, and the mountains are so high, you feel like you can touch them. So it's
really.
a spectacular, unspoiled country.
And I don't know this, but well, I flew over, I believe, Nunavut when I flew to Beijing, and I remember looking just because I always ask for the window seat because I'm the guy who won't sleep because I would love to look out the windows.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember thinking that too. I took pictures with my crappy old cell phone. It was 2014, but I don't know.
20,
No, no,
but
no.
they were so high up and they were s it was so vast an area, you always felt like you could almost touch them.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if you
but like
look at if
bigger than the Rockies, right? Yeah,
Yeah, well, the
yeah.
Rockies, you kind of pass over them fairly quickly, but Greenland seems to last longer. And
I see.
if you look at any pilot's cell phone and he's flying the Atlantic, guaranteed there'll be a picture of Greenland on there somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's spectacular.
So on your flights, is there a particular time of day you'd fly over? Like sun? Is it the sun, or like is
Well,
there?
when you're going east to Europe, you're usually flying at night, and
Mm,
coming west, then you're flying during the day. So you would only see it during the day, and then you have to be far enough north that you would see it. So depending on the winds, so everything's planned on the least time, so that saves you the most. That's the most fuel efficient route. And
right.
if the least time track takes you over Greenland, and it's sunny because you never know on the Atlantic.
Rolling
Uh,
the dice.
right. So when those things align, it's a spectacular treat to see that.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So at nighttime too, like love documentaries, and people are coming out of they're foregoing their pension here. Colin, are you gonna break the? Are you gonna say you've seen a UFO?
No, no,
No,
I've
you're
got
not
no
gonna tell us.
stories.
Are you? You're not gonna tell us anyway. Not
In
today.
the old days, they'd put you in a rubber room, but no, I never saw one. The nicest
Rubber.
thing I ever saw was lots of shooting stars, and the northern lights are the best thing. I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen the northern lights that you just can't capture that stuff on film, what we see.
And favorite place that you've been in all of your travels? I know you mentioned Bogota. I think you said Nairobi earlier, and I don't know if that was because they
I
were a
think
favorite place or
No, no, I think Cape Town is probably the best place I've ever been. I love Cape Town, and that's it's in private travels as well.
yeah.
Just,
Yep.
yeah, I like that part of the world. And sometimes layovers are dependent on who you're with too. So, as I said before, a good
Mm,
layover with a lousy guy or a lousy layover with a good guy affects your impression of the place. And a good layover with a good guy is the pinnacle. And
yeah. Well, it's
Cape Town is
and
one of those places.
what about just words of wisdom if there were people or anybody who wanted to go pursue flight? Maybe, I don't know. I know it's not just a hobby most people can go pick up these days, but maybe people who are in a position to do that, or young people especially if they're thinking you'd like to be a pilot. What would you say to a young person maybe approaching the end of high school, or what would you tell
Well,
the
I tell
15
them
or
the
16
different
year old?
avenues. I tell them about the military if that's their cup of tea, because that takes a special person to be able to do that, because it's a long
Yes, it
commitment. That's the problem with the military is you don't get in and 2 years out, you've got a pilot's license. You're in there for,
25 years.
yeah, it's a
I would
long
have still been
commitment.
in.
Yeah. And then the college avenue is certainly a good route. And then you can do it privately. And the options now are different than when I went through. You can go to university and get a degree. When you get on with one of the major airlines in Canada, you either need a university degree or an aviation degree from one of the flying colleges. So, if, for example, you didn't get into a flying college, then you can go and get a university degree in a subject you like, which has an advantage of having a fallback plan if things don't work out.
Yep.
And
Like,
then
yeah,
do
it's
the,
always good. Plan B.
and then it's an expensive route, but then you can fly if you're flying privately after that. So you'd probably have a job after a university degree. Perhaps it would allow you to pursue flying. But again, that's going to be a long trek. I mean, if you've got
Yeah,
deep
yeah.
pockets, you could go to university and fly on the side. But that's a personal means
Right. Or
question.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So those
Yeah.
are the. I mean, I've been out of this kind of thing for a long time. You know that my daughter flies now, so she went to university. She wanted to be a pilot out of college or out of high
Yeah.
school, and we discouraged her, thinking she wanted to do it for the wrong reasons. And she went and got a university degree, and then traveled, and then decided she still wanted to be a pilot. And so she'd already checked the box of having the degree, so she spent the money and got her license privately and then started flying in the bush and that sort of stuff and eventually got on with an airline. So
Yep.
that's just one way. There's so many different ways of doing it that it's
Hmm.
hard to create a cookie cutter
Well,
method
yeah,
of
and
doing it.
when I was living in Germany doing my master's, I literally went to a career convention because just north of Bremen, there's a name of Bremerhaven is what I'm thinking is where they build the Airbuses. And so we went there, and I went to a career expo for Lufthansa, and they had a program. So at 25, I looked at because I'd left the military college, but I still wanted to be a pilot. But again, financially, it wasn't reasonable. So Lufthansa has a program all the way. They'll send you if obviously you apply and there's a selection process, but then they have a flight school, I believe, in Utah or Arizona, one of the two, and they do your whole flight training. They start you and you work all the way up. But again, it's more like the military where you have a commitment. You know,
And they trained that school in the Lufthansa school is famous because they trained all the Swiss Air pilots and a lot of the Dutch pilots as well. And they basically take you out of high school after the screening process and they put you through. And the guys that I flew with had hardly any experience at all, but they had a guaranteed job when they got out and a long career ahead of them. And so they're they're a bit of a liability in the beginning because they have so little experience, whereas in North America, you don't get those jobs without having a few miles under your belt. But great opportunity because flying's they don't have the general aviation industry over there that we have here, and
but if
so
you
it's
don't know
harder to get
you're
your license.
if you don't know you're in danger, Colin, are you in danger? Right? Yeah, danger is my middle name. So I feel pretty confident, as we head towards the end of our interview, that I probably could fly the same planes as you.
You probably could. They're all
You know?
push button now.
Yes.
The systems on airplanes now have changed so much that you're now more of a manager, a systems manager, than you are
Oh
a
yeah.
pilot. There's a lot less um, emphasis put on good hands and feet for the flying ability, uh, and a lot more put on systems management and using the systems that are automated on the airplane to get you out of or into situations. Whereas in the old
I
days, it
see.
was like fly the airplane, get it all under control, and then engage the automatic systems. So it's just been an evolution over the years. But
Yep.
I mean, that's 50 years ago.
Well, and that's like even now with cars and vehicles with these, they're not self-driving, but like lane guidance and
Yeah.
adaptive cruise control, right? Those, and people resist those things, and ultimately there are things that come and go and take time, and but that's the way of all of our history, right? If we didn't,
Hmm.
nobody would be flying if nobody took risks or
Right.
did any of these things or developed these systems.
Right.
But do you ever fly? Do you ever do any private piloting or
No, I
like
got out at
no?
the top of my game, Jamie.
Yeah, yeah. Why would you?
Some guys stay in the
It's like
game
Kenny.
too long.
It's like Kenny Powers, right? He just like goes back to his town. He was a Major League Baseball. It's a ridiculous TV show. he like turns around and tells like a very small American town F you, and he like throws 90-mile-an-hour fastballs, and he gets all the way to the majors, but he parties his way out, and he goes back home, and he still thinks he's like in the majors, but everyone's like, okay, Kenny Powers, and he ends up becoming the phys ed teacher at the local high school.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You would love it.
I haven't seen it.
Eastbound and Down. It's pretty vulgar, but I'm telling you, it's so ridiculous. So you're basically, I was saying, is you're Kenny Powers. You're going out on the top of your game.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's an expensive hobby, and I've
Yeah.
seen a
No, I
lot, and
understand. Yeah.
I don't like to just. First of all, I'm not big on aerobatics. It's not my thing, and those little airplanes don't go very far. So I'm more interested in, if I've got $100 to spend, I'd rather spend it buying a ticket to go across the world. It's not $100, obviously, but
Yeah.
than
No,
I
but
would to fly a little airplane. So you choose where you spend your money, and mine is in traveling as opposed to flying little airplanes that now.
no, that makes sense. And to do it that way, that's why it's so tough these days, right? So, hey, I had a
Right.
question too, because I drive past Buttonville enough, and when I went up in a couple flights at Gravenhurst, who, without Buttonville, who's now running? Oh, I guess who runs the air traffic control for Gravenhurst? Would it be the island? Does the island have its own
Timmins,
thing?
I think.
Timmins.
Timmins has a flight service station the last time I flew into Muskoka, it was the Timmins flight service that you talked to. I believe it's the same. Again, I don't keep up on that sort of stuff, but
Yeah. But I was just curious. Yeah, but that
yeah.
was just something I knew. Yeah. And so, any upcoming trips that you're planning? Is there anywhere that you've
Yeah.
never been? Oh, I was gonna say like Antarctica again. You don't. There's no reason to ever fly near there, right? Are there any flight
No,
paths? No.
no, not in this part of the world. Maybe there's some other airlines, but no, that would definitely be at the top of my list. The problem is it's becoming more and more touristy, and as you know, because you've traveled as much as I have, that
Well,
as soon as a place is touristy, it's being spoiled. I like a
that's it.
place that
Yeah.
isn't on the tourist radar yet, and so it's you go to a country and you try and find something that nobody else has discovered. And for me, I'm a firm believer that I would rather see a few things well than a lot of things not so well. So
That's
when I
right.
get to I'm going to India with my daughter for a month in the new year. And it's a huge country, and we're trying to decide where we're going to go. And we've sort of said, okay, let's pick two places, and we'll spend our time in those two places so that we get a chance to get out and talk to people and see what it's really like rather than just do the touristy things. So
I like
that's
that.
kind of the
Yeah,
way we do it.
a bit more authentic, right? Like that's it. Is like, I mean, I do enjoy going to Cuba, but I like to get to know the people. But again, it feels like more censored, and the idea of getting off the resort or off the beaten path is always something special for me too. Because you're like me. I think you want to meet the people and actually I'm not here to watch a movie. I'm here to, try the food or to learn something and to bring something back that has changed me, right? And that's
Mhm.
also what a privilege that in my, I mean, I haven't probably been to as many places, but what I say is for my age, traveling has been, I was inspired by a high school teacher, Mr. Stratton, in grade 11. He had been to over 130 countries, I want to say.
Wow,
And I've been to, I think, 32 or 33 when I
that's
last counted.
impressive still.
Well,
Yeah.
it is very impressive, and then you start getting to the point where you're like, what a privilege to even be counting countries you visited.
And I think you get caught up when you first start traveling in
Yes, you do.
counting the
You do.
stamps in your passport.
Yeah.
And as you mature, and I know you've done this kind of traveling, as you mature, you
I'm
think,
very mature, Colin. Thank you. Thank you, Colin. I'm very, yeah.
but the more you travel, the more you want to just see a country. You don't care about the number of them anymore. You just want to see a country and travel around it, spend a month in a country and get to know the people and so on. And then you get to see the country when they let their hair down. In other words, you see
Yeah.
you're not looking at the Taj Mahal in India where everybody there is a tourist and everybody there is trying to get your money, and you're seeing the backwoods of Bangalore, and a family comes up to you and says, "You must come back to my house and stay
That's
with
it.
me tonight." And those are the experiences that I crave when I go away, is
Yeah.
the people and the generosity of the country, and saying they just want to talk to me and they want to get to know me, and that's when
And
we have
that's,
the
yeah.
interaction that makes
To
the
know that
trip
that's,
special.
and to see that as generosity too. And
Yeah,
just
and
as an aside here, is Colin's the kind of guy who pulls up next to a camper after seeing Dutch license plates on it and invites them back to his house to camp. That's a true story. So he that's the karma. He gets out what he gives. He invites
That's
people over to Bracebridge
you
to hang
you
out at a
you
stop
have to
sign.
look for opportunities to pay
Hey, that
back what people have done for you because that's what makes your trip special, you know? You hope that after you've done something like that, the people's impression of both Canada and their experience in Muskoka is one that they won't forget. And because that's what so many people in my life have done when we travel, that we remember those
amen.
people. They may
Yes,
not
amen.
remember us, but we sure remember them.
And that's it. Like Sharif when I was in Morocco, and his name isn't even Sharif, and that's what our guide was telling me. He's like, oh, I said I was trying to know the driver's name, and he goes, oh, his name's Sharif, and Sharif means boss or something. And to this day, I still remember Sharif with the big mustache, and those are the things. Like I was lost in the Paris train station, La Gare du Nord, and I'm like, I don't know where to go. And there's a guy with a briefcase who just takes a moment to walk me all the way to my gate. I was there 17 by myself, and I look back, I'm like, man, what was I doing at 17 by myself in Paris? I saved up and I knew I was going to the military. So I worked at Rogers and I saved my pennies. I paid $739.05 to get on an Air Transat flight. And I talked to my teachers. I did my work in advance, and I took the month of May of grade 12, and I went to Paris and went on a motorhome trip.
That reminds me of my wife and I when we were dating. She was going on a trip to England and leaving me alone, and I had $2,500 burning a hole in my pocket. And I said, "Fine, you go to England, but I'm going to Europe. I'm taking a backpack, and if you want to come with me, you can." And she said, "Okay, I will." So we went to Europe in 1983, the fall of 1983, and we were just going to stay till we ran out of money, and we ran out of money in February, but we travel all over Europe and I didn't know anything. I got over there with my backpack. I think it lasted a week and then it collapsed. And then, you're walking around with a garbage bag over your shoulder with your clothes in it until you're going to find a cheap backpack to
Yeah.
replace it. But
But yeah,
that set
the
the scene
vagab
for us.
yeah, that's what I'm saying is like the vagabonding is like, and again on those hot days when you're going back to even as a pilot and all of your seasoned, the testing of that you still have on those hard tired days, you still have those tests. But again, in all of the travels, it's usually the hardships or those moments where you're like you overcome and you look back and you're like, wow, that is what people, you could call it trauma, but it's hardship. I almost missed a flight from Barcelona to Marrakesh, and in the moment I wanted to just murder my buddy because he misread the ticket, and we're out in Barcelona, and I look at the email again, and he had said the flight was at 4 or something, whatever, it was at 1. It was off by a couple hours. Neither of us spoke Spanish, and it was like 400 degrees and got the backpacks, had to go
Oh,
back from and we were the last two on the plane, and we just made it, and then we landed, and then it was just like, ha, ha, ha. And an hour later from Barcelona or whatever, you're in Marrakesh on this bus. And this was after 9/11 too. And, and the
wow.
music's different. And there's people outside, and going through the culture shock and just sitting there with the music and the people. And it's like, I came here, I'm here now. And the captain's like, and it was like 8 o'clock at night. It was 47 degrees Celsius. I remember it. He goes, it's 47 and I went outside, and like these guys start coming up, and I mean, like everything on the news from grade 9 to university and going to the military. And then all of a sudden I'm in an Arabic, country. And then just realizing all of those experiences that just, when you're honest about it and you own your own biases too, and you allow that, like what a privilege. And then again, that's like what you say, I try to come back and pay it forward. In that's the privilege of that. And that's also with Canadian grit. Not everybody's had those chances, but we also have an opportunity today more than ever to access information and to go places virtually and to learn. And that's where I say is like, man, what a missed opportunity to not use the resources we have efficiently to improve our lives. Like even if it's flight, if it's whatever, because in 2 minutes here, one of my last questions I had for you is like, if the world stopped and listened to you, as a retired pilot, as a human being, what are the transferable skills after a life in the aviation industry that you think that could be transferable to anybody? What have you learned about a life in that industry? I mean, you've basically said it. It's been tough, and you got to be adaptable.
I think those are the negative things, like being tough and adaptable. I think the things I've learned in my time is compassion and forgiveness. You work with people that they don't agree with you, or passengers that have had, they'll be going through challenges and you don't know what they're going through, but you understand that they're going through something, and you have to just be a human being instead of always wearing your official hat and saying no, this is not allowed, or just being reasonable.
Policy.
Yeah, just being putting yourself in other people's shoes
Yeah.
and treating
I
them the way
wish,
you'd
yeah,
like to be treated.
that's it. I wish more people would do that. I love that. I love that. And
I
I
mean,
mean,
it's noble to say it. It's one thing to do it, though. It's another thing to do it, though. And I think that's looking back at it philosophically, I can say, yeah, I think I tried to do that as much as I could, but there's certainly times when perhaps I could have done it and I didn't. And I think if we just are
well,
aware
I
of it,
think we get, yeah, exactly.
then
Well, that's
at least you'll probably try to do it more often than not.
well, that's the work, right? And that's part of our personality. And again, knowing yourself, as that goes back to yourself. And that's what I say to kids. And today, it's like sitting and watching Netflix. Just as a last philosophical thing, we're inundated, right? There's sometimes 30 minutes to pick a show. You know, if I found, even if you ask people these days, what's your favorite color, and they go, well, what do you want it to be? Because they're so worried about, and they don't know. And it's like, well, if you don't know your own favorite color, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I think that's
Hmm.
also where we're at these days too.
Yeah,
Again, where I come to is some people are, say, so misdirected, arrogant, or misinformed that they're willing to say, I'm not going to follow science on this. Say, I don't know, just say a mask or a vaccine. But then they will go get on an airplane or they'll drive their car. And I say, well, explain to me the mechanics or physics of flight.
right.
And you can't tell me about the Rolls-Royce engine and how a jet engine was, and if you don't like those group of people, well, actually, rocket scientists were people who were persecuted and actually went from Germany and established the NASA rocket program. And a lot of those people actually came from the Avro program that was canceled, and they went to NASA because Canadians wouldn't pay for them. So, it's easy to say blah, 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 but life isn't just cut and dried. And I think that's the problem with the internet and influencers. Like you say, they just show you, oh, you're going to be jacked. And it's like, no, you got to lift the weights. You got to
Yeah.
rip the muscles to do the
Hmm.
work, right? Show
Hmm.
up. If it was easy, everybody would do it.
Right.
Right. And finding the grit. And again, I think the passion and that you've shown that too. And as a human, and I think the title of the episode was apt. Because in all of that, again, you could just say I fly planes, but it's like, no, no, no. If that were the case, computers could do it, like you said, right? There's so many factors there, right? It's interesting. So,
You, yeah.
well, hey, I really appreciate you taking time to share some of your experiences, because it's just nice that you take the time and even would want to sit down, excuse me, and share that. Is really nice on Labor Day weekend.
Well, thanks, Jamie. You made it a pleasure. It's like a walk down memory lane sometimes, and it's certainly my pleasure if there's anybody interested in this sort of thing that I can provide any guidance or help.
Well, that's a big thing that I'm trying to do, is just this networking. And it's like, you never know, because even as a teacher or an educator, I'd have kids who say, I want to be an architect. And I'm like, oh, I have a friend who, and then I think people think I'm maybe full of it. And I'm like, no, no, no. In my travels and being like this and being open to other people, they do become friends. I have a friend named
Mhm.
Joey who owns a resort in Tanzania. I do have friends who own a resort on a,
Tell me about Joey. I want to go.
yeah, well, Joey owns Honey Badger Lodge in just outside of Arusha in Tanzania,
Okay,
and
I'm going to call you about that.
it's right at the foothills of Mount Kilimanjaro. And
Perfect.
again, he owns his own whole safari company. We went out to the Tarangire and to the Serengeti, and then also to the Ngorongoro crater, and it was like
Perfect.
a 6-day thing. But he's also very linked in. So his wife is from England. She's a white lady from England, and they run that together. But she also does a ton of work through England to support locally Tanzanians and the youth. And
Cool.
we also stayed with a guy named, I have a shirt, Tom, who's out in Pangani on the Indian Ocean, and we stayed at his resort. And so he comes from Switzerland, and he flies back and forth all the time, but he grew up in Switzerland, and one of his parents was from Tanzania. And here's just a quick anecdote about being nice to people. Our school program went there year after year, and I just went there, and he gave me a free T-shirt, and there's a big marlin on the back. I said, man. He goes, yeah, we do deep sea fishing. And I said, oh, man, that would be a dream. And I was there teaching. I was there for professional reasons. He had no reason. And then the one day I had free time and he saw me sitting there and he goes, what are you doing? And I go, nothing. And he goes, let's go out in the boat. And he takes us out on this great big boat. It had like 2 or 3 motors on it, deep sea fishing. We went by all these grouper, and anyways, I went fishing, deep sea fishing on the Indian Ocean because this guy Tom, I sat there at the bar and asked him about his life, and then I get out there, we get one fish, and the guy Pat, who I was teaching with, he's a duster. I'm going to call him out on it. He lives in Kingston, Ontario. He sat down in the chair and he stole my barracuda fish. He had nothing to do with organizing the trip, and it was like as soon as the rod hit, Pat sits down in that that like just like in the movies, the big seat on the back. He sits in the chair, takes the rod, and I'm just staring at him like, you just stole my fish. And he goes, what are you gonna do about it?
That's good. Well, we hosted a kid for 3 months from Tanzania, stayed with us. And
I would go back, and if you go back and I'm available, I would go with you in a heartbeat.
Well, we're thinking
it
November.
Changed my life. Well, let's go.
Okay.
I got an infant. He's in.
Yeah, right. You just get him started with the needles now, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's actually on my list of the short list to go in November for some time, and I loved the country when I laid over there. We used to lay over in Dar es Salaam, and
is that right?
I love Dar es Salaam, so I want my wife to see it.
The food, everything about it, like fresh, the coffee, the people. It was just something really miraculous. And you have to get yourself some instant coffee. The Afra Cafe is what got me through. We were in this little village in the mountains. I can't think of the name of it. It'll come back to me. But and drinking this Afra Cafe, and it was just like this boiling hot water with it's like Folgers instant coffee, but Afra Cafe.
Perfect. I'll be picking your brain about that for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk again. And again, I really appreciate it. And
it's my
you take
pleasure,
care, Colin.
Jamie.
And thanks for being here.